Welcome to the podcast ABCs of Parenting Adult Children. Please join us as we discuss parenting adult children and the unique struggles that it comes along with.
Hello and welcome to ABCs of Parenting Adult Children podcast. My name is James Moffitt and I'll be your host. Today we have Jonathan Steele joining us. Hey Jonathan, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're up in Snowland, huh? Up in Chicago, Illinois?
That's right. Today is a little bit more mild than the last week or so, but we are Snowland.
How much snow do you normally have?
You know, some of the winters are mild, and then some of them are feet in a day. So it's hard to give you a real good approximation of that, but more than I would like.
You get tired of shoveling that crap, huh?
I sure do.
I'm sorry. So, hey, introduce yourself to the listening audience, please.
Sure. I'm a divorce lawyer based in Chicago. I've been doing that as a lawyer for 12 years or so. I also recently started a sort of cybersecurity and privacy consulting firm named Steel Fortress that gives sort of client-dependent, obviously, consulting advice on how to approach different issues that people are facing.
Very good. So yeah, I'm going to read something from your profile. It says, explore the intersection of family law and cybersecurity with Jonathan Steele, emphasizing digital privacy protections for families, especially during divorce or custody disputes, offering insight into safeguarding personal information and assets. And I think that's good information for any of us to have, especially when it comes to family law and when it comes to digital protection and privacy. And as I'm thinking about it, family law encompasses more than just divorce, right?
You know, we get a bad rap for being family law lawyers, that we're sort of like the joke of our practice. But the reality is, to be a divorce lawyer, you need to touch on business law, tax law, sometimes criminal law, property. So you're sort of a jack of all trades to be able to divorce people.
You handle wills and stuff like that?
I personally don't, but there are people within my law firm that do.
I got you. Okay. All right. So, you know, as I told you earlier, we have, you know, our listening audience is probably parents of teenagers, preteens, teenagers, and everything up from 18 to 40, right? So there's always going to be, I think it's good for us to educate ourselves and to be provided information from people like you to help us to add tools to our tool chest in case we ever need those sort of things. And while our parents themselves may not be in a divorce, God forbid, they may know family members that are going through that sort of thing. So what you have to say could certainly be very relevant for them or their family members.
Yeah, it's a evolving field. It's sort of a game of whack-a-mole, trying to keep kids safe and not stumbling upon something that ends up traumatizing them later in life. So the divorce lawyer hat that I wear allows me to sort of identify a problem and all the different ways that it manifests when somebody's in a divorce case. And then the other, like, cybersecurity side of me helps to fix that problem as best as possible.
All right, so maybe we can focus on the digital privacy aspect of your profession.
Sure.
You want to talk about that?
Sure. And, you know, in the context of kids, you know, having my own kids is sort of what spawned this particular passion for family security, family privacy, that sort of thing. But I've also just been running into it in the law practice as well. I have a case right now involving two young teenagers they're in a stalking case. And, you know, the evidence is tens of thousands of Snapchats that have gone back and forth between the two of them. And so, you know, if I could give a message to listeners, which are people with kids of that age, maybe it's an invasion of their privacy and it's a warranted invasion. And you sort of have a duty to protect your kids from these kinds of situations that they may unknowingly stumble into. And I think, you know, it's parenting advice more than legal or tech advice, but I do think it's important that you're sort of transparent with them up front that, you know, you may be a big kid now and I'm giving you a phone, but at the end of the day, it's my phone and I will take it back and I will look at it as I see fit. And it's for your own protection. And then
right.
it takes sort of like the sleuth element out of it, and you're not spying on them because you're open with them. But it is necessary because what they can stumble upon is horrific sometimes.
Yeah, and I think I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, and we didn't have internet back then. We had encyclopedias in the local library. That's where in papers, and that's where we got our information. And but now, you have kids, teenagers, young adults that they were born with a smartphone in their hand almost, and they have had access to the World Wide Web and all these different apps that are on the, like you mentioned, Snapchat and TikTok and Facebook, and just there's a whole plethora of applications that can be installed on a smartphone or on your computer, and it opens an entirely, it opens up a new world to you, and it's the virtual world. And as we both know, there are predators out there that prey on unsuspecting and possibly vulnerable youth that, are not aware of that. And they may be on lines looking for friendship and looking for support or looking for the wrong things, that they should be looking elsewhere for. So it's sex trafficking. That's a huge issue in this day and age still, and parents, I think parents need to be, they need to understand that internet access at home is a privilege. It's, to me, it's not necessarily a right. It's a privilege. All the things that parents provide for their kids, obviously shelter, food, transportation back and forth to school and to events, and, things like that, are probably more of a right than a privilege. But when it comes to all this extra stuff that we spoil our kids with, that's not necessarily a right. It's more of a privilege, and you can manage their access. Like I know, like I tell people all the time, I'm like, if you're having a hard time setting a boundary with your kids, and you're telling them turn the devices off at 9:00 at night, and you go to bed, and I don't want to go past your room and see the white light under your door, right? If they don't honor that boundary, guess what? You can go to your home router, and you can actually manage each device on your home network by MAC address, and you can block all kinds of apps. And they can get online all they want. And obviously, you need to change the admin user ID from admin and get rid of the password that's password, because kids are smart, and if you have the default user ID and password on your home router, they can very easily hack that and get in there and do whatever they want. So just buyer beware, or parent beware, practice some common sense safety on your home network.
One of the things that I think gets overlooked is not just the giving access to the World Wide Web, but more so what kids are exposing about themselves to someone they may not even know. And a lot of people don't seem to understand, once I send a picture of myself out there, it's out there. You're never getting it back. So this whole generation of kids now that are sending nude pictures to each other, thinking, Snapchat auto deletes, or, I'm good, I'm safe. You're not.
Right.
If you don't want a picture to show up in your LinkedIn profile or your job application, don't put it out there, because you will not be able to get that back. You may be able to get it taken down off of certain sites and whatever, but there's a Wayback Machine where you can reload old versions of websites. And once it's out there, it's out there. And one of the things you mentioned is that I think shelter is a right that we afford our children. I think you're right. But I think that extends to protecting them. I view this as I'm sheltering my kids from what's out there. And,
Absolutely.
If I'm putting a phone in my kid's hand, it's not unfettered access to whatever the phone is able to access. I'm going to put belt and suspenders on that before I hand it to my child, so that to your point, I don't need to monitor the usage, because I know that it's monitoring itself, and it's cutting off at a certain time, and it's allowing
right
certain duration of app usage and certain apps that I've specifically approved. I hear your MAC address filtering, and I'm trying to think as a smart kid that's outsmarting parents now, especially kids that have access to AI. They're going to go into AI and they're going to say, okay, my dad set up MAC address filtering on our router. How do I get around that? And most
Oh,
of
of course.
most of those large language models are going to walk you right through it innocently enough. They're going to tell you, here's how you spoof a MAC address and clone a different device's address. So trying to stay ahead of the curve is the parents' nightmare for the duration.
Well, that's why it's so important to have a good user ID and password. If you have a password that's alphanumeric and it's that long, right? They're not going to ever guess that. They're not going to break that. You know, that's one doorknob they can rattle all day long, and they're not going to get through. But unfortunately, a lot of parents are not very tech savvy, and they just go to Best Buy or they get a hold of Comcast, and the tech brings the modem out and plugs it in, and they never think twice about changing the user ID and password. And that's the very first thing I do. And in cybersecurity, you hear all the time, how do hackers break into these corporate enterprise networks? They find devices that have been installed and the user ID and password hasn't been changed. That's the number one thing they look for. And once they get their claws into your network and then they start moving around, they make all kinds of changes and steal PII data and all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah, every listicle you read nowadays touches on change default passwords. So, to me, it seems like given to change it, but given how often I'm coming across these articles where that's still being told to people as like top 5 advice to hardening yourself, it must very well be the case that not everybody is using best practices. It sounds like, from what I can gather, a lot of people are still using password 123, or they're using admin.
Oh yeah,
admin.
yeah. Or their pet, or the child's name and birthday, or just something that's ridiculously easy to guess. And but anyway, so talk about your. How long have you been a parent?
Going on 6 years now.
Okay.
I've looked at that protective role that I assume as a father, and I sort of look at it as security in layers. I don't like to just rely on, I put screen time on my kid's iPad, I'm good to go. Because often enough, I'll come back. I left them watching YouTube Kids and they were watching Bluey or something. And I come back and now they're watching a 50-year-old man in his basement unpacking Bluey toys and playing with them. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that, and that's why it's allowable on YouTube Kids. But I don't particularly find that to be what I want my kids to be watching.
What? I don't even know what that is. What in the world is that?
The unboxing videos?
Yeah.
It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a grown man that doesn't show his face on YouTube, opening kids' toys and playing with them. And for whatever reason, kids like that.
Okay.
I think it's a little bit creepy, and so I try to go beyond just the screen time, and I'm also trying to think back to my own childhood. I was crafty. I would have found a way around screen time, so I'm trying to think like myself. How would I be trying to get around it? And so now I've got like DNS level filtering on their devices. They're behind a firewall that does filtering when they're at home. I have configuration profiles set on their devices so that they can't just go in and change these things. So I'm doing as best I can to avoid that one day where they stumble across an article about here's how to unblock all the things that your parents have blocked.
Right. So you use VPN at home?
I use VPN on my personal devices. For the kids' devices, I just use NextDNS to do DNS level filtering of domains and services that I don't really want them to be using.
I got you. Well, it's good stuff. It's very important for parents to take internet security seriously, because it's.
Sounds like
Siri just answered. Siri just answered me. Let me turn my phone upside down. She's listening to my conversations. Did you hear that?
She's listening to you, and she's recording you, and she's sending it back to Apple.
Yeah, probably. You're probably right about that. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions here. How do divorce and cybersecurity intersect in today's digital age?
A number of different ways. I'm seeing a lot of trackers, whether they be AirTags or the Samsung equivalent of it. I'm seeing those being used for surveillance of a spouse or even using kids' devices to surveil the spouse's whereabouts and when they're in certain places. So knowing how to navigate that is an intersection that is unavoidable. And then, being a divorce lawyer, you also try a lot of order of protection, stalking, no contact order kind of cases. And more than you're used to, you're seeing cyber stalking or cyber harassment or online bullying, and knowing how to unravel that in a way where you can actually prove the allegations requires a certain skill set that I think most divorce lawyers are lacking.
I got you. What crucial steps protect family privacy amid legal disputes?
It's a number of different things. I think something that I try to push a lot of clients onto is data removal services. And I think they do a good job of automating what you can do yourself, but just wildly time consuming. And so whether you're going to like an easy opt-outs or a join delete me, what they're doing is they're going into all these data broker sites and they're submitting deletion requests on your behalf. So like whitepages.com and Radars and all these huge data brokers that sell your information for $1. They're going through and deleting these things for you. So I think that's a good first step to try to clean up what's out there, and then controlling what you're going to put out there, at least while you're in the middle of your divorce case. If I can't get people to, get off of social media, I'll try to help them to button up their privacy settings and try to prune their followers list so that information about travel and expenses that they're incurring during the divorce case aren't just being unknowingly sent to the other side.
What's funny is that law enforcement, they have been using social media to track down criminals. And it's like, I think that's one of the tools in their tool chest. Investigators, they're looking for somebody, they just get on Facebook and start looking for them, or, especially Facebook, because everybody's on Facebook. And it's like people just put their whole life out on Facebook. It's like, it's real easy to track people down because I'm sure you've seen it too. You see stories where, law enforcement, like here in Charleston, Berkeley County Sheriff's Department, I've seen them interact with people they're looking for. They got warrants for their arrest and they're on Facebook talking smack. And they're like, okay, keeps talking smack, we're going to come get you, and it's funny.
I think you're right. I think people do overshare. They put their whole lives on Facebook. And some of the aggregating factors is they do it live. So you're away on vacation and you're live streaming to your public audience. I'm not at my home. Now's a good time to break into my home because I'm on vacation. So, I'll at least tell people, if your heart's set on just posting all these family photos from vacation, wait till you get home. Scrub the metadata. If I can get you to go above and beyond, remove sort of the camera information, the GPS location from your photos. Even though I think Meta does a good job doing that now, just it gives me peace of mind knowing I did it myself first.
Right, exactly. Common sense stuff.
Should be.
Can you share a complex case that highlights cybersecurity's role?
Yeah. I actually have two right now that have almost identical fact patterns where there's like spyware being installed on one of the spouse's phones, and that creates a whole host of problems because I can't communicate with that client in a way that I feel secure because their spouse is reading it, or they have keyloggers on their computers and things. And I'm actually going through this with two clients right now, almost identical facts, and it required just like a complete reboot of everything, wiping their devices, setting them up anew. One of them actually said, I don't even care if you wipe it, I want to buy a new device entirely, and helping people to unravel that. Sometimes it's just a matter of giving them the peace of mind that maybe you're paranoid is the wrong word, because you're paranoid until you're right. But being able to tell someone, I looked at your device, I don't see, unknown users that are here. I don't see like SSH keys that allow somebody to remotely access your machine. Your firewall is on, your privacy settings are fine. So you're reasonably secure. So sometimes, people are swatting at ghosts, and it just helps to hear from somebody that's a little bit more knowledgeable in the area that you're good. But then there are the people that you come across that aren't good. They do have some version of spyware installed on their devices, and most of the time you can help them with a wiping of the device, which is inconvenient as can be. But you really got to start sort of at the core, which is, in my view, how is it that you're going to communicate with me as your lawyer? So that first things first is like, I need you to be on an email provider, an email account that's new. If you're a Gmail user for life, God bless you, but let me get you on Proton Mail, or let me get you
right, absolutely,
and lock that down with good two-factor authentication. And if only for your communication with me, fine. I think you should end up using it because it's as good, if not better, than alternatives. But let's set this up. You can use that as your lifeline to me. Then we'll talk about, do we want to get you on like Signal so we can have instant messaging a little bit more secure? And then you work out from there and you start trying to get them on password managers and hardening their financial accounts and retirement and health kind of accounts. But I'm looking at it as triage. And I have that, as I mentioned, those two cases where they are actually in need of some pretty comprehensive reboot. So those would be the complex examples I can think of.
All right. That's very good. So we've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but how can parents secure digital communication during custody battles?
It depends on what the platform that we're securing is and who the sort of beneficiary of the protection is. So if we're securing the parents' communication or if we're securing the kids' communication, I guess they could be one and the same, and it's going to be a similar step-by-step, which is hardening the security settings, using a recovery email account that is an email that only you have control over. Sometimes using a VoIP number is better than tying it to a real cell phone number because cell phones can be SIM swapped. And then really paying attention to the privacy settings. A lot of the apps that we use and our kids use by default are pretty invasive when it comes to privacy settings, and it's an opt-out process rather than an opt-in. And every app I install, I go through and I pay attention. I'm looking at what I'm giving access to, what I'm agreeing to, and if I have the ability to turn it off, I turn it off. So I think the vast majority of people they click through these things. They're called contracts of adhesion for a reason, but I think it makes sense to know what you're signing up for.
Right. Very good. Yeah, those things that we agree to online, they're like 15 pages long, and you need to be an attorney to even understand what in the world they're talking about. So
I don't always understand what they're talking about. So being an attorney is not the all leveling of the playing field there.
Oh, that's true. But you have a better chance at it, maybe.
Yeah.
What strategies exist for maintaining digital privacy post-divorce?
It's going to be much of the same, and some of that's going to hinge on whether or not you have kids with your spouse or your ex-spouse, because kids end up being like homing beacons, and their devices end up reporting back to the other parent, and so you'll hear things post-divorce like, you're keeping the kids out too late. Why are you putting them to bed at 10? Well, how do you even know that? And the answer to that question is like, well, I have my child on Find My Friends, and so I can see where they are and when they are there. Or they have an AirTag, or they have an Apple Watch, or whatever the device is pinging home. And so, at least being mindful of the tracking device that you are carrying around vis-a-vis your child is a first step. Knowledge is power. So if you at least know that's happening, then the next step is maybe, depending on what it is, clearer to you. But if you're not even aware of the fact that you're carrying around this tracker, you're not looking for what can I do to mitigate.
Right. I never even thought about AirTags. Now that you mentioned it.
Yeah, I mean, I've AirTagged my kids when we go on vacation. They make like a little rubber band strap that you wear as a watch, and you plop the AirTag in it, and it's a little peace of mind if you're in an airport and you get separated from your kid. It'll help a little bit. And sometimes parents put AirTags like in their kids' backpacks or like an umbrella or things like that, or a bike, and they can be very helpful in certain circumstances, and then they can be a little intrusive in others.
Right. All right. So what would you, if I gave you 5 minutes, what would you tell parents? What would you tell the listening audience?
That it's your job to protect your kids. You're protecting them from physical harms and physical dangers every day. You're providing them shelter. And it's important to understand the threat landscape nowadays extends beyond physical threats, and there are digital threats. There are threats to privacy online. There are threats to cybersecurity. And while it may not interest you as a parent to delve deep into cybersecurity, there are resources that can help you, and it's a duty. So get interested, learn how to do it. And it's not a light switch, right? It's not one day you're secure or one day you're not. It's a journey, and there's little things you can do on a daily basis that go a long way. And so you don't have to look at it as this huge, daunting, insurmountable task of like, I need to turn my kid's iPad into Fort Knox and I need to do it tonight. Start with something small, use a different DNS provider, use a VPN, look at the screen time settings, and learn if you can attach a Google account to your family supervised account. Little things every day is going to end up going a very long way, and it's not going to be quite as daunting as trying to sit down and do it all in one fell swoop.
Gotcha. Well, Jonathan, I appreciate what you bring to the table, and it's really good information for parents to secure their home networks and protect their children from online threats. And I thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. So to the listening audience, thank you for the privilege of your time. You can listen to this podcast on Spotify. You can actually watch the video on Spotify. And if you go to parentingadultchildren.org, that's parentingadultchildren.org, you can go to the website and you can get my contact information, leave me a voicemail. You can click on my email account. Upcoming show schedules are there, and it's got a place where you can leave a review. So if you watch a podcast episode that you like, click on review and leave me a review. I'd appreciate that. You can also listen to the audio version of the podcast on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast, and Public Radio. I think there's a few more, too, that are out there I'm not really that aware of. I release a new episode every Friday morning at 8 a.m. And thank you for listening, and y'all have a wonderful day.
Please tune in next week for another episode of our podcast on parenting adult children.